Welcome to another edition of On My Mind. This is another COVID edition of On My Mind. Here we are in August 2020, and who would have thought that when we started this whole virus thing 6 months ago that we'll still be in this situation, the unknown, uncertain, unlimbo situation that we are in today. I'm stuck in lockdown in Melbourne, Australia. We have a strict lockdown here, so strict that we actually have a nighttime curfew. I think it's the first time that I can think of that we are in a Western democracy, liberal democracy, where we have curfew not just for 1 or 2 nights, but probably for the next 6 weeks. And we cannot leave the house. We cannot go anywhere after 8 p.m. So, kind of a crazy situation we're dealing with everywhere in the world. But the LNG market is, as usual, crazier than ever. And I think it's been interesting to watch the LNG market. You would think that it'll kind of take a breather here, but the interesting news keeps on coming all the time. So if I look at the LNG market in terms of demand, supply, and prices, the three levels that we should look at all times, I think demand has been the most interesting. Demand is actually coming back up quite robustly in a lot of countries that have got the virus under control. Of course, we talk about China, and the Chinese demand this year is not much different than it was the year before. But I think I have a feeling that other places, India, the rest of Southeast Asia, even to an extent Europe, the demand's actually going to come back quite nicely. It may not be at 2019 levels, but it would not be dramatically different than maybe 2018 levels, and it will come back up. And the reason is because I think energy consumption is still there. People are still working. They're working from home, and in some ways, it's probably less efficient energy-wise to work from home because you have a lot more lights and a lot more inefficient appliances going on. And a lot of the places, the manufacturing is considered, essential businesses, and the manufacturing industries are continuing their work. So another thing, of course, is happening is because of these incredibly low prices everywhere in the world, where we have wellhead prices in the US equal to spot prices in Asia and in Europe, which is crazy. We're seeing a demand response to the low prices. The low prices are driving an increase in demand. We're seeing a lot of places in Southeast Asia and other emerging markets that are now getting very serious about LNG. They've been talking about LNG for a long time, but now they look at the prices and say, hey, at these prices, we could actually convert our LNG, our coal-fired power stations into LNG. And, and we'll have a cleaner air benefit, and we might get international investment to do that because no one wants to put money into coal nowadays, coal-fired power stations, but there's still a lot of money into LNG infrastructure. So actually, I think that the demand is going to keep on growing, and it's going to be very widespread. We're seeing more and more emerging markets around the world saying we can actually take an opportunity, take advantage of these great prices, these flexible terms, and a lot of money being thrown at them to kind of upgrade their power systems. So expect to see a lot more integrated LNG power projects being proposed and developed potentially around the world. And we're also seeing, this happening in places that are talking about it a long time, like Vietnam and the Philippines, etc. So I'm quite optimistic on demand. Supply, on the other hand, is going to be the shocker. We saw 2019 was a blockbuster year in terms of new projects, new LNG projects. 2020 will be just the opposite. I would not be surprised if actually no LNG projects reach the final investment decision this year. And it's very simple. People make their decisions on what's happening in the world around them. They look out the window and say, oh my God, the prices are low and they may not come back up again. So I'm not going to invest billions of dollars in a project that takes 40 years of life, that needs a higher price than the current spot price. But we've all seen these cycles. We know that when the prices go down, they go, we think they'll never go up, and when they're up, we think they'll never go down. So actually what we're seeing is this reaction, understandable human nature, but at the same time, a short-sighted reaction. We're not seeing enough new projects being sanctioned. So look, it's very difficult now to sign long-term LNG deals because the spot price, which again is not representative of the long-term price, but that's the price people look at, is lower than any project can deliver on a full cycle, which is CapEx plus OpEx plus shipping cost. So who's going to invest and develop a new project? And it's very difficult to convince buyers that they should sign up long-term deals that may not start producing for another 5 years, but still, why do it today when prices are so low? Well, the reason we should do this is because I think we're going to see an incredibly supply crunch coming up. These consultant reports we've all seen, predicted this massive surplus for the next 20, 3, 4, 5 years. That's all crap. A lot of them were based on big projects coming on all at once. If you look at the graphs, a lot of them assume, Qatar is going to bring in 30 million tons by 2023. Well, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Qatar still hasn't picked its project partners, let alone start designing the plants, let alone start constructing the plants, etc., etc. You are not going to see plants take, no matter what you talk about it, 4, 5, 6 years to go from startup, from a project concept to commissioning. And Qatar still has not picked its international partners. Now, it's always said that it needs international partners. Now, it could probably do it on its own without the international partners, but with the international partners comes their financing. And so I think, it was very optimistic. And Qatar is not the only one. We have projects in America that were 20 million tons, and a lot of the consultants assume they'll all come on all at once 3 years from 2020 to 2023, and that's what will be a surplus. Well, again, it's not going to happen. We are obviously seeing demand that went down. It will recover, but has not recovered yet. And there's reluctance from the buyers to sign up for long-term deals. And if they do sign up for deals, which really hasn't happened much, they'll sign up for very small volume deals with flexible terms, shorter terms, flexible terms, and shorter tenors. So this year is going to be very difficult for enough long-term deals to be signed to underpin LNG projects around the world. And I don't see that changing in the next 2-3 months. So we're not going to see the FIDs this year. If you don't see the FIDs in 2020, and you may not see that many FIDs in 2021, maybe towards the end of 2021, you're not going to see production of these projects before 2024, 2025. And suddenly all this surplus forecast is going to be out the window. So the way I look at it is, I think we're going to be in a crunch before you know it. We might be in a crunch in 2023 even, because projects have not got built. Last year those projects are getting built, but they're getting built more slowly than we thought. Mozambique is going slow. Canada looks like it's going potentially slow as well. And I think that we'll see that we're going to actually see a rapid supply deficit happening in 2023, and it might see an increase in prices. What's been really hard to predict before this year was the problems that some of the big projects are having, especially here in Australia. It just seems that there's bad news after bad news for all these big projects that were built way too fast, way too expensively, all over budget by these super majors in the last 5 years. We have seen impairments, which is the write-downs of value of $12 billion in Australia in the last few months. So $12 billion of whatever was spent, $100, $200 billion, $12 billion at least has been just written off. And I don't know how many other industries you can have where the management can say, oops, we made a mistake, here's $3 billion, we take off the asset value, and they're still continuing business as usual. So surprising to me, but we have seen not only the asset values drop dramatically of nearly every Australian new project, but we have also seen technical troubles. Prelude, which is just going to be a big white elephant. It's $17 billion, $20 billion. Who really knows? No one. Shell's been, super secretive. And this is another lesson. If you're super secretive and things go wrong, the egg's on your face. If you're open about it and talk to the world, maybe we can all try to help and figure out what the solution. But Shell has been so secret about the Prelude from day one. And I think it's kind of interesting that, as far as I can see, that's not going anywhere. It's not producing gas. It may not produce gas for a long time. I read somewhere that the best thing that could happen will end up in a shipyard, in a ship cutting workshop in Bangladesh or Pakistan or India, and be sold as scrap. I mean, look, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that in the end of the day, you spend $17 billion on a project that produces 3.6 million tons of LNG and a fair amount of condensate, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And you kept on just throwing good money after bad. So that's a technical problem. And then the surprise of Gorgon, which is another giant Australian project, we see there's some technical trouble, and they may have to take it down for a few months as well. So what might happen is actually some of these projects that were, quote, already in production phase, like Gorgon is 15 million tons. If that goes off the market, that's enough to throw the world totally into an imbalance as well in terms of LNG prices. Not this year, but next year when the demand recovers. So I think what we're going to see is that the supply is going to be a lot less than we think it is. And I think it's very easy to get complacent and think there's lots of supply, but I'm not so sure. I think we better think twice about LNG supply and start supporting the LNG supply, because I know for a fact that there are a lot of import terminals still being proposed everywhere in the world, a lot of LNG or gas-fired power stations being proposed. So I don't see the demand, as I said, demand's going to come back up in the next couple of years very quickly, if it's not come back up already in some countries, but the supply is just not going to happen if we don't work on it today. So we're going to see a supply crunch, and that means that there's going to be a price crunch. So I think, towards the end of this year, we're going to start seeing prices start rising, and it's going to keep on rising and rising and rising for the next few years, because there's just not going to be the supply and the demand is going to be there. And then we got all the geopolitical stuff. China is, of course, not so happy with the US. It's not so happy with Australia. These are two potentially large LNG suppliers for China. China may look elsewhere. Where is it going to look? It's going to have to look to places like Russia. Well, Russian projects are going to have a tough time finding money and development. There's a lot of ambition in Russia to grow the LNG portfolio, but look at what's happening in Nord Stream. That just means that, America, whether we like it or not, can put the screws on a lot of financing and make it very difficult for new money to flow. So China may be kind of in the market, is trying to grow LNG and not have a lot of supply, because a lot of its legacy suppliers in Southeast Asia don't have a lot of extra gas. They're using it internally, domestically. China may not want to buy that much from Australia. It buys a lot from Australia today, but that might change. Qatar is not going to have a lot more to sell, and Qatar doesn't really sell on a short-term basis at low prices, which is what China wants to buy on the spot market. So the spot market might tighten up, and that tightens up, then suddenly the sentiment changes. So I guess in a nutshell, we're going through a transition in many, many ways. We're all transitioning, working from home, etc., as well. But in the end, don't be complacent. I think the LNG markets are going to turn, and they're going to turn fairly fast. And next year, 2021, we're going to start seeing rising prices, a realization there's not enough supply, and a realization that demand is going to come back up to what it was maybe in 2018 or 2017. It's not going to just be destroyed anyway. And in the end of the day, who's going to build these new projects? The super majors don't really have an appetite to build new projects anymore. A lot of them are getting out of this giant LNG project development business. It is going to be the small, nimble, entrepreneurial developers. And a lot of them are going to be in the US, because that's where gas supply is available. So expect to see a real strong case for a second wave of US LNG coming up as well. Hope that was interesting. Let's see what happens, and let's talk again in a few months. Thanks.